Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Imagine waking up every day knowing that no matter how hard you work, no matter how quietly you endure, the people who are supposed to see you simply don't. Not because you have no value, but because they've already decided what your role is. A servant, a shadow. Someone meant to stay in the background while everyone else shines. For years, that was my life. While others celebrated milestones, I carried trays. While others were praised, I was given another chore. While laughter filled the house, I learned the quiet art of endurance. Every order, every dismissal, every moment of being overlooked slowly built a question inside me: what happens when the person everyone ignores finally gets seen? But life has a strange way of revealing truth in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes just one moment, one glance, one person with the ability to see beyond what everyone else believes. And when that moment arrives, everything changes. Today, I'm going to share a story about patience, silent strength, and the power of being underestimated. It's a story about years of quiet endurance that led to one unforgettable moment at a wedding, when someone in the room noticed the one person nobody thought was worth noticing. What happened next didn't just surprise the guests, it changed everything my parents believed about me. So stay with me until the end, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about dignity, timing, and the incredible power of proving your worth without saying a single word. From the earliest moments of my childhood, my life was defined not by love or guidance, but by endless chores and unrelenting expectations. While other children played and laughed, I was handed a broom, a mop, or a rag, instructed to scrub, sweep, and polish until every corner of the house gleamed. My parents never saw me as a child with dreams or desires. They saw me as someone whose sole purpose was to serve, whose worth was measured in completed tasks and silent obedience. Even the smallest misstep drew sharp words or icy glares, reinforcing the lesson that I was disposable and invisible unless I fulfilled my role perfectly. I learned early on to swallow my frustration, to hide the sting of humiliation behind a practiced smile, to keep my resentment tucked safely away where it could not be seen, because any outward display of defiance only worsened the punishment. The house was filled with constant reminders of my inferiority, my siblings' accomplishments praised loudly, their desires catered to, while I was expected to disappear into the background, a shadow whose presence mattered only when a chore was unfinished. I remember watching family gatherings with a sense of detachment, noticing the laughter and the attention lavished on others, while I quietly mopped the floor or polished silver, my contributions acknowledged only through silent expectation rather than gratitude. Yet in this environment of neglect and relentless labor, a quiet resilience began to grow within me. I noticed the world outside the confines of servitude, imagined what it might feel like to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could do. Small sparks of self-awareness flickered whenever I caught glimpses of my reflection, or moments of fleeting pride when a task was completed perfectly, even if no one noticed. These experiences were not merely exercises in obedience, they became lessons in endurance, patience, and the subtle cultivation of dignity. Every chore, every order, every whispered criticism became part of a deeper education, one that taught me to endure without breaking, to observe without revealing all that I felt, and to quietly prepare myself for a future in which my worth could no longer be ignored, a future in which the world might finally see me, not as a servant but as someone deserving of recognition, respect, and admiration. Even as I continued to perform the endless tasks assigned to me, a slow but steady awareness began to take root within me, that my life did not have to be defined solely by the servitude forced upon me. While my parents saw only a child to be ordered around, I began to notice the subtleties of the world beyond my immediate environment, glimpses of freedom and recognition that seemed almost like a secret privilege I could claim one day. I observed people outside the family, noting how they were treated with respect, how their opinions carried weight, and how their presence could command attention without fear or apology. These observations planted a quiet seed of ambition, a sense that if I could survive the relentless demands and ridicule at home, there might come a moment when all of that would no longer matter. My inner life became a refuge, a space where I could imagine myself as more than a servant, where I could cultivate self-respect and confidence in secret. I began to notice the power of appearances, the way a well-chosen outfit or a polished manner could attract attention and influence perception, even in situations where others tried to diminish me. At the same time, I learned the art of restraint, understanding that outward displays of anger, resentment, or frustration would only reinforce the narrative my parents had created, that I was small, powerless, and unworthy. I became skilled at concealing my true emotions, at smiling when my heart was heavy, at performing my duties flawlessly while quietly holding on to a sense of self that was independent of their judgment. In these moments, I realized that patience itself could be a weapon, that by enduring and observing, I could prepare for the day when circumstances might shift in my favor. Each task I completed, each insult I swallowed, and each moment I spent unnoticed became part of a larger strategy I did not yet fully articulate. I quietly developed a sense of timing, of how influence could arrive unexpectedly, and how those who dismissed me might one day regret underestimating me. This internal growth was as crucial as any skill or talent I developed in secret. It taught me to value my own presence even when others did not, to recognize my worth independently of external validation, and to cultivate a quiet strength that could not be seen but could not be ignored when the right moment arrived, a strength that would eventually become the fulcrum of my unspoken revenge and ultimate recognition. As the years passed, the unfairness and neglect I endured at home began to harden into a quiet, simmering resolve. The endless chores, the constant orders, and the relentless comparisons to my siblings had shaped me into someone who understood the harsh realities of being overlooked. Yet beneath that hardship, I discovered an inner strength I had never been allowed to recognize. I started to realize that my parents' perception of me as a mere servant was not a reflection of my actual abilities or worth. It was a limitation they imposed, and as such, it could be challenged in subtle but meaningful ways. Every time I completed a task flawlessly while remaining invisible, every time I absorbed another cutting remark without breaking, I learned not only patience, but also strategy. I began to observe patterns in my parents' behavior, noting how they responded to flattery, appearances, and attention from outsiders. These observations were not acts of defiance in the moment. They were careful, deliberate studies, quietly accumulating knowledge that I could one day use. Alongside this growing awareness, I nurtured skills and qualities they had ignored or dismissed. I took care to cultivate manners, posture, and presentation, understanding that these could command respect in ways my daily labor never would. I explored talents in secrecy, finding solace and empowerment in things as simple as reading, learning, or practicing a skill that could set me apart. Over time, these small victories built a sense of identity that existed independently of my assigned role, a hidden version of myself that I could bring into the world when the opportunity presented itself. Meanwhile, I also developed emotional resilience, learning to navigate humiliation and injustice without allowing it to corrode my sense of self. I understood that revenge need not be loud or immediate. It could be quiet, patient, and devastatingly effective if timed correctly. Every unnoticed act of diligence, every suppressed tear, every moment spent serving without recognition became a preparation for a moment when all of that effort would culminate in something undeniable. I grew increasingly aware that the world outside my parents' house operated on different rules in which merit, appearance, and composure could carry weight far beyond the confines of the household. This realization was liberating, providing the foundation for a careful, measured plan to assert my presence and value. I began to see that the injustice I endured was not permanent, that recognition and respect could be claimed on my terms, and that one day, the very people who had dismissed me would witness a transformation they could not ignore, a revelation of worth and power hidden for far too long. The disparity between how my parents treated me and how the outside world valued people became increasingly clear as I matured, and this awareness stirred something deep within me, a combination of longing and determination. I realized that my parents' treatment was not inevitable, that their strict control and constant belittling were choices rather than absolute truths about my abilities or potential. While they insisted I exist only to serve, I quietly began to explore the idea that I could be seen, recognized, and respected beyond the confines of their expectations. I observed those around me, neighbors, teachers, family friends, and noticed how confidence, composure, and the smallest displays of dignity could alter perception entirely. Even a brief moment of poise or elegance seemed to draw attention and admiration effortlessly, something that had been systematically denied to me in my home. I began to internalize the lesson that perception could be manipulated subtly, that outward appearances and demeanor could wield influence in ways that raw effort alone could not. This insight became a quiet form of rebellion, an unspoken strategy I nurtured while continuing to fulfill my duties at home. I polished not only the surfaces I was ordered to clean, but also the facets of myself that could one day be noticed: my speech, my posture, my ability to remain calm under scrutiny. In private, I practiced self-expression, allowing myself to cultivate confidence, taste, and skill that had never been encouraged. The contrast between my inner growth and my outward servitude became a source of strength, a secret power that my parents could neither perceive nor diminish. At the same time, I learned to read people carefully, to sense when attention could be captured and how small gestures could shift perception dramatically. I realized that those who underestimated me, including my own family, were blind to the potential that existed quietly beneath the surface. This knowledge became intoxicating in its promise. The idea that one day, recognition could arrive not because I demanded it, but because it could no longer be denied. Each task performed under duress, each command obeyed, and each insult endured became part of a larger preparation, a hidden accumulation of resilience, poise, and readiness. I began to see that patience was not merely about survival, but about positioning myself to seize the precise moment when all of the careful cultivation of self-worth, skill, and presence could be revealed in a way that demanded acknowledgement, a moment in which those who had dismissed me would be forced to confront the truth of my value, the undeniable proof that I was far more than a servant, and that the world beyond their household recognized qualities they had never chosen to see. Living under the constant shadow of favoritism and neglect, I became painfully aware of the unequal treatment within my own family. My siblings were showered with attention, praised for minor achievements, and indulged with privileges that I was never permitted to enjoy. Every success they achieved was celebrated loudly, every desire they expressed was accommodated, while my contributions were overlooked, minimized, or simply taken for granted. It was a constant reminder that, in my parents' eyes, I existed only to serve and to blend into the background, my individuality irrelevant and my ambitions dismissed. The contrast between their treatment of my siblings and their treatment of me created a persistent ache, a sense of invisibility that was both humiliating and infuriating. Yet, as much as it hurt, this disparity also became a lens through which I could study the mechanisms of attention, approval, and social validation. I began to observe not only my parents' behavior but also the reactions of others to how they interacted with my siblings versus how they treated me. I noticed how easy it was for certain people to gain recognition simply because of the way they were presented, the confidence they displayed, and the attention they received, and it became clear that the world operated on rules different from the household I inhabited. Over time, I internalized this knowledge and allowed it to shape my own sense of self, quietly resisting the narrative imposed upon me by maintaining a sense of dignity and cultivating my abilities in secret. I became attuned to the subtle ways I could demonstrate value without confrontation, to the understated power of composure, patience, and quiet competence. I began to imagine a future in which my worth could no longer be ignored, a scenario in which the very eyes that had overlooked me would be forced to recognize the person I had become. Each insult endured, each chore completed without acknowledgement, each moment of invisibility contributed to a reservoir of strength and resolve, teaching me not only endurance but also strategy. I learned that visibility and recognition were not things that could be demanded, they were things that could be earned, cultivated, and revealed at the right moment. The imbalance within my family, which had once been a source of shame and frustration, became a silent motivator, driving me to prepare for the moment when the world outside my parents' control would witness a version of me that was confident, polished, and impossible to ignore, a living testament to the fact that I was far more than the role I had been forced to play for so long. Over time, I began to realize that the very fact I was underestimated could become one of my greatest advantages. My parents' constant dismissal of my abilities, their insistence that I was only capable of servitude, and their fixation on my supposed shortcomings had created a situation in which no one expected anything remarkable from me. This underestimation, which had been a source of frustration and pain for years, slowly transformed into a hidden opportunity. I understood that if the world assumed I was insignificant, I could cultivate skills, confidence, and presence in secret, developing aspects of myself that would one day surprise everyone. I started to recognize patterns in how people reacted to those they underestimated, noting that a sudden display of talent, beauty, or composure could provoke astonishment, admiration, and even fear. The invisibility I had endured became a kind of camouflage, allowing me to grow without interference or scrutiny. While my parents were focused on my obedience and on the privileges of my siblings, I devoted myself quietly to building a version of myself that existed beyond their control and expectations. I paid careful attention to small details: manners, posture, appearance, voice, and the subtle ways in which confidence could command attention. I learned that influence and recognition were rarely achieved through shouting or confrontation. They came through timing, precision, and the element of surprise. This understanding fueled a patient, almost strategic approach to life, in which every task performed under duress and every insult endured was an investment in the eventual revelation of my worth. I also became increasingly observant of social dynamics beyond the household, noting how people responded to elegance, grace, and self-assurance. I began to practice these qualities in private, rehearsing the comportment and poise that would allow me to step into the light when the moment arrived. In essence, I was transforming the pain and neglect I had suffered into a quiet form of empowerment, honing skills and self-awareness that could not be dismissed. This process was not immediate, nor was it free of struggle, but it instilled in me a sense of patience and strategic foresight. I realized that revenge, in its most potent form, did not require confrontation or anger. It required preparation, timing, and the careful cultivation of qualities that could not be ignored when revealed. The years of being overlooked, undervalued, and treated as a servant became the foundation of a silent power, one that would eventually allow me to step forward with undeniable presence, command respect, and assert my value in a way that left those who had belittled me both stunned and helpless to dispute the truth of who I had truly become. As I continued to live under the strict control and constant demands of my parents, I began to recognize the value of developing talents and strengths that existed entirely outside their awareness. While they focused on my compliance and my servitude, I secretly nurtured skills, interests, and abilities that gave me a sense of identity beyond the role they imposed upon me. I discovered that cultivating these hidden strengths not only provided solace, but also a quiet empowerment that could never be taken away. Every act of learning, every personal improvement, became a private rebellion, a way to assert control over a life that had been largely dictated by others. I took note of the power that beauty, intelligence, and composure could hold in social situations, observing how attention and respect often followed those who carried themselves with confidence and grace. In secret, I refined my appearance, my manners, and my demeanor, understanding that these qualities could act as a bridge to recognition when the right moment arrived. Beyond superficial observations, I also developed mental resilience and patience, learning to endure humiliation and injustice while quietly preparing for the opportunity to step out of the shadows. This period of hidden growth became a crucial aspect of my personal strategy. By honing myself in ways my parents could neither see nor appreciate, I was building the foundation for a transformation that would be undeniable when revealed. I also became acutely aware of timing, understanding that recognition and influence are not given immediately, but must be claimed at moments when they cannot be ignored. The contrast between my outward servitude and my internal cultivation of skill and self-respect created a dual existence, one that strengthened my resolve and sharpened my ability to navigate social situations with subtlety and insight. Every chore I completed, every order I obeyed, and every insult I endured became part of this preparation, teaching me discipline, endurance, and the quiet assertion of agency even in circumstances that seemed entirely disempowering. Alongside this, I learned the art of observation, noticing how others responded to attention, beauty, and competence, and using these lessons to anticipate how I might one day command recognition without confrontation. Over time, this hidden self, refined through patience and perseverance, became increasingly distinct from the servant my parents assumed I was, and I began to understand that my value was not determined by their approval, but by my own cultivation of skills, confidence, and presence. This realization instilled a quiet, simmering determination, the knowledge that, eventually, the world would witness a version of me that had always existed, waiting patiently to emerge in a way that could no longer be dismissed or ignored. Over time, I became acutely aware of the importance of outward appearances and the subtle ways in which they could influence how others perceived me, even while I continued to live under the strict control of my parents. Though they treated me as invisible and unworthy, I noticed that small adjustments in posture, expression, and demeanor could command attention and respect from those who were not blinded by prejudice or expectation. I began to experiment in private with the way I carried myself, practicing confidence in ways that were quiet but deliberate, learning to project poise even when my heart felt heavy with frustration or humiliation. This cultivation of presence became a form of empowerment, a method of asserting my worth without needing permission or validation from the very people who had denied it to me. I realized that while my parents sought to define me solely through labor and obedience, the world outside operated on different rules, where grace, composure, and quiet confidence could capture notice in moments when it mattered most. The contrast between the life I performed for my family and the version of myself I was nurturing in secret grew sharper, and with it came a growing sense of strategy. I understood that being underestimated was a tool in my hands. It allowed me to develop skills, talents, and a sense of self that would eventually emerge with impact, because no one expected it. In addition to cultivating my appearance, I also focused on developing social awareness and emotional intelligence, learning to read the subtle cues of people around me, to sense when attention could be captured, and to recognize the fleeting opportunities in which recognition could be earned. These lessons were learned in small, quiet moments: an exchange with a neighbor, a compliment from a teacher, a glance from someone who noticed my composure. I began to internalize the idea that true power was not loud or confrontational, but precise, timed, and undeniable when revealed. Each task I performed without acknowledgement, each insult I absorbed without complaint, and each moment I endured invisibly contributed to this hidden preparation, reinforcing patience, resilience, and an understanding of human behavior that my parents could neither see nor appreciate. I recognized that the combination of inner strength and outward presence, cultivated in secret, could one day create a moment in which my value could no longer be ignored, a moment when the careful shaping of self would collide with circumstance, commanding attention, admiration, and respect in a way that transformed the perception of those who had long dismissed me. Living under constant scrutiny and frequent humiliation, I became intimately familiar with the sting of being belittled in front of others. My parents, in their relentless drive for control, often used public criticism as a tool to reinforce my supposed inferiority. Simple mistakes or minor oversights were amplified, drawing sharp words or scornful looks while others watched, creating a deep sense of embarrassment that seemed inescapable. I learned early on that any display of frustration, anger, or sadness would only fuel their perception of me as weak or unworthy, so I mastered the art of concealment, wearing a calm, obedient exterior while my emotions churned inside. Family gatherings became a particularly intense theater of humiliation, where I was expected to serve, attend to every need, and remain unseen, all while my siblings received attention, praise, and indulgence. I watched guests laugh and converse, noticing the ease with which others commanded attention, and contrasted it with the weight of invisibility and subservience I carried. Each act of public embarrassment, though painful, taught me valuable lessons in endurance, patience, and observation. I became highly attuned to social dynamics, noticing how even a slight shift in demeanor or timing could influence perception. I began to internalize the understanding that power and recognition were not always granted to those who worked the hardest, but often to those who carried themselves with confidence, grace, and strategic awareness. The experiences of humiliation strengthened my resolve. Rather than breaking me, each scolding or critical remark became a reminder of what I wanted to escape and what I wanted to achieve. In private, I began cultivating skills, manners, and poise that would allow me to step into a new light when the moment arrived. I practiced composure, learning to smile even when my heart was heavy, to answer with politeness even when my mind seethed, and to transform moments of potential shame into quiet exercises in self-discipline. Over time, I realized that public humiliation, once a source of pain, could be leveraged as a training ground for resilience and strategic thinking. I began to see that the same social settings in which I was demeaned could later become arenas for recognition and triumph, if I approached them with patience, preparation, and the careful cultivation of confidence. Each moment of forced service, each public reprimand, and each insult endured quietly became a stepping stone, teaching me to navigate the scrutiny of others, to refine my presence, and to prepare for the moment when the tables could turn, and the acknowledgement I had been denied for so long could arrive with undeniable impact. As the years of being overlooked and undervalued stretched on, I began to recognize a subtle but powerful truth. The very fact that I was underestimated could become an advantage if I approached it strategically. While my parents focused all their attention on my siblings and expected nothing beyond obedience from me, I quietly observed, learned, and prepared, understanding that being ignored allowed me to grow in ways they could not anticipate. I noticed patterns in their behavior, the ways they reacted to praise, to appearances, and to recognition from outsiders, and I realized that their perception was limited by their own assumptions. This insight became a secret form of empowerment, a way to transform years of neglect into preparation for a moment when my true value could no longer be denied. I began to cultivate skills, presence, and confidence in private, knowing that each small improvement was an investment in a future where I could step forward with undeniable impact. While my parents continued to treat me as invisible, I refined my posture, manners, appearance, and social awareness, understanding that these elements could influence perception in ways that effort alone could not. I also developed emotional intelligence and patience, learning to endure humiliation, frustration, and inequity without allowing them to diminish my inner sense of self. Each task completed without recognition, each insult absorbed silently, and each moment of forced servitude became part of a larger strategy, the careful accumulation of resilience, composure, and readiness for the right opportunity. I learned that true influence often arrives unexpectedly, and that when attention is claimed with precision, it can leave an indelible mark on those who previously dismissed or underestimated you. The awareness of being underestimated gave me the advantage of invisibility, allowing me to cultivate a hidden strength that could later be revealed in a way that demanded acknowledgement. I began to see life itself as a series of moments, where timing, preparation, and presence could shift perception dramatically. This understanding transformed my experiences of neglect into tools of empowerment, teaching me that patience, observation, and quiet cultivation of self-worth could create a situation where recognition and respect would come not because I demanded it, but because the world could no longer ignore what I had become. In this way, the long years of being underestimated and treated as a servant became the foundation for a reversal of fortune, a carefully prepared emergence of strength, confidence, and undeniable presence that would surprise, impress, and leave lasting impact on those who had once refused to see my value. As I moved through the years of living under the oppressive expectations of my parents, I began to understand the quiet power of observing the world beyond my household. While my life was defined by servitude and constant oversight, the world outside operated on different rules that valued talent, composure, and presence over mere obedience. I started to pay attention to how people interacted with one another, noticing the way confidence and grace could command attention, how subtle gestures and refined manners often earned respect, and how recognition could be captured without confrontation. These observations became lessons in strategy, teaching me that influence and acknowledgement were not given automatically but could be earned with patience and careful timing. I realized that every moment spent performing tasks unnoticed, every insult endured silently, and every humiliation absorbed could serve as preparation for a moment when my worth could be revealed unmistakably. In private, I cultivated my skills, appearance, and self-awareness, practicing the poise and confidence that I knew could one day turn the tide of perception in my favor. I experimented with posture, speech, and expression, learning to convey elegance and assurance even when no one was watching, building a hidden version of myself that was separate from the one my parents believed they controlled. Alongside this, I nurtured emotional resilience, understanding that composure under pressure was a form of power, and that patience could be more effective than immediate rebellion or confrontation. I also honed the ability to read people, to sense when attention could be claimed, and to recognize subtle opportunities to assert presence in ways that could not be ignored. This period of quiet cultivation became a foundation for eventual recognition, as I realized that the very invisibility enforced upon me by my parents gave me freedom to grow without interference. Each secret improvement, every small act of self-discipline, and every hidden display of skill and grace accumulated into a quiet strength, preparing me for the moment when the world would finally take notice. I began to understand that my past suffering and subjugation were not merely obstacles, but training grounds, teaching lessons in patience, strategic thinking, and self-reliance. By observing, preparing, and cultivating myself in ways my parents could neither see nor appreciate, I was slowly shaping a presence that, when revealed, would be impossible to overlook, transforming years of invisibility into a powerful assertion of value, respect, and undeniable recognition in the eyes of those who had long dismissed me. As I quietly endured the constant demands and restrictions imposed by my parents, I began to understand that my invisibility could be turned into a form of power. While they focused their attention on my siblings and monitored every minor failure of mine, I had the freedom to observe, learn, and refine myself in ways that went unnoticed. Each day of servitude and submission became an opportunity to practice patience, discipline, and strategic thinking, even if I did not yet fully understand the depth of what I was building. I started to cultivate small skills and personal qualities in secret, aware that these hidden strengths could one day allow me to step forward with authority, grace, and undeniable presence. I paid close attention to the dynamics around me, noting how people responded to confidence, elegance, and subtle displays of competence. I realized that while effort alone could be overlooked, composure and refined demeanor could command attention in a way that was difficult to ignore. I began to practice these traits in private, experimenting with posture, speech, and expression, learning how to carry myself in ways that suggested inner strength and self-assurance. Simultaneously, I nurtured resilience, understanding that enduring humiliation, criticism, and neglect without losing my sense of self was essential preparation for the moment when recognition would matter most. Each unnoticed achievement, every chore completed flawlessly, and each insult absorbed silently became a stepping stone, reinforcing my ability to remain composed under scrutiny and to quietly assert my worth when the opportunity arose. I also developed a keen sense of timing, recognizing that recognition and influence are often not immediate but must be claimed at precisely the right moment to have maximum impact. I observed how attention could shift quickly based on perception and presence, and I prepared myself to seize such moments with confidence. In this way, I transformed the hardship and invisibility of my upbringing into a form of empowerment, cultivating both inner strength and outward poise that could not be diminished by neglect or mistreatment. Over time, I began to understand that my parents' attempts to limit me had, paradoxically, created the conditions for me to grow in ways they could not perceive, equipping me with the patience, strategic awareness, and cultivated presence that would allow me to step forward one day and assert my value in a way that could no longer be ignored. As the years of servitude and quiet observation continued, the approach of my siblings' wedding brought both anticipation and tension. While I was expected to remain in the background, performing countless tasks to ensure that every detail of the celebration reflected perfectly on the family, I began to see the event as a stage where unnoticed effort could be contrasted with personal presence and potential recognition. I was still treated as invisible, relegated to menial chores, running errands, and attending to the needs of others, while being excluded from the attention and excitement surrounding the wedding. Yet, beneath this surface, I started to prepare myself for a moment that could alter perceptions, recognizing that the very invisibility enforced upon me provided a unique opportunity to emerge unexpectedly and with impact. The wedding, a meticulously orchestrated event, became a lens through which I could observe social dynamics, noticing how guests responded to elegance, confidence, and poise, and imagining how I could harness those observations to assert my own presence when the time was right. While performing the tasks required of me, I focused on cultivating subtle qualities, grace in movement, quiet confidence in interaction, and a refined appearance that could quietly draw attention without seeming forced. Each act of service, each chore completed perfectly, became a rehearsal in patience, discipline, and endurance, reinforcing the internal understanding that true recognition would come not through complaint or confrontation, but through precise timing and careful preparation. I watched the interactions between family members, friends, and important guests, noting who commanded attention and why, and using these observations to refine my own behavior. I began to anticipate the moment when someone would finally see me as more than a servant, imagining the surprise and admiration that would follow once the carefully cultivated presence I had been developing was revealed. This period of quiet preparation transformed the wedding from a source of anxiety into an opportunity to assert value and command recognition in a way my parents had never allowed or expected. I nurtured the awareness that every unnoticed effort, every moment of exclusion, and every act of invisible service was building toward a pivotal moment of revelation, an opportunity to demonstrate dignity, grace, and worth in a setting where the contrast between my hidden preparation and the assumptions of others could create an undeniable impression, turning years of neglect into a carefully orchestrated emergence that would leave a lasting impact on those who had long overlooked me. As the wedding approached, I became increasingly aware of the presence of the bride's father, a figure whose authority, discernment, and influence seemed to command attention effortlessly. While I was still relegated to the background, performing endless tasks and remaining unseen, I could not help but notice the way his eyes scanned the room, how his demeanor reflected both attentiveness and respect for those around him. There was an air about him that suggested he recognized qualities in people that others overlooked, an ability to perceive worth beyond surface appearances. I began to imagine, quietly and carefully, how my own presence might intersect with his perception, knowing that this was the type of attention that mattered and could create an irreversible shift in how I was viewed. As I moved through my duties, I started to consider the possibility that recognition could come from someone outside my family, someone whose judgment was not clouded by the assumptions and biases my parents had instilled. This awareness became both a source of hope and a motivator, driving me to refine the subtle qualities that had been cultivated in secret for years: posture, composure, grace, and an understated confidence that could speak volumes without a word. I understood that while my parents had denied me acknowledgement, the right observer, someone discerning, influential, and capable of seeing beyond the imposed role of servant, could notice and appreciate the value that had been invisible to those closest to me. Each movement I made, each small interaction with guests, became a rehearsal for a moment of recognition, a silent exercise in timing and awareness, preparing for the instant when the careful cultivation of my presence could intersect with the attention of someone who could alter perceptions decisively. I began to anticipate the moment when his glance might linger, when subtle gestures or expressions might communicate what words could not, and how that recognition could ripple outward, challenging the assumptions my parents had enforced for so long. The awareness of his presence created a sense of strategic focus. It was not enough to endure and survive. I had to position myself in a way that allowed the culmination of years of hidden preparation, patience, and refinement to become evident. This careful observation and understanding of the bride's father's attention marked a turning point in my internal strategy, reinforcing the lesson that recognition is not merely about visibility, but about being noticed by the right person at the right moment, someone whose judgment could validate the worth and dignity that had been denied to me for far too long. As the wedding day unfolded, I felt the full weight of exclusion and invisibility imposed upon me by my parents, yet I also recognized that this environment, though oppressive, was setting the stage for a moment of profound significance. I moved through the day performing endless tasks, serving guests, arranging decorations, and attending to every minor need, while remaining deliberately unnoticed, as though my existence was merely an extension of the household's labor rather than a person with worth or presence. The contrast between the celebration of my siblings and the invisibility I endured sharpened my awareness of how perception could be manipulated, and how the smallest gestures or the slightest presence could suddenly capture attention if positioned carefully. I began to focus not just on completing my duties, but on maintaining composure, poise, and quiet confidence in every action, understanding that these qualities, though subtle, could leave a lasting impression when finally observed by the right person. I noticed how guests interacted, where their eyes lingered, and how respect was often given to those who carried themselves with assurance, even in the midst of chaos. This understanding became a quiet form of strategy. By enduring my assigned role while cultivating the traits of presence and refinement, I was preparing for a moment when my value could no longer be ignored. Every movement, every polite response, every smile offered without expectation of acknowledgement became part of a larger preparation for recognition. The tension built as I anticipated the possibility that someone outside my family, someone discerning and attentive, might notice the effort, grace, and poise that had been invisible to my parents for years. In this way, the very act of being deliberately overlooked became an asset, allowing me to remain unnoticed while strengthening the qualities that could command attention at the perfect moment. I rehearsed silently, aligning my appearance, behavior, and demeanor with an unspoken plan, knowing that when the right eyes finally met mine, the contrast between expectation and reality would create an undeniable impact. The exclusion I faced, which once felt humiliating and demoralizing, now became a crucible for preparation, forging patience, self-awareness, and the ability to project dignity under scrutiny. By positioning myself carefully within the crowd and sustaining a presence that was both subtle and compelling, I set the stage for a revelation that would shift perception, challenge assumptions, and allow the acknowledgement I had long been denied to arrive with full force, transforming invisibility into a moment of undeniable recognition and quiet triumph. As I moved through the chaotic whirlwind of the wedding, I became increasingly aware that small personal preparations could have a disproportionate impact, even in a setting where I was expected to remain invisible. While my parents assigned me endless duties, insisting that I blend into the background, I began to focus on cultivating aspects of myself that could quietly capture attention at the right moment. I paid careful attention to my appearance, ensuring that even under the strain of constant labor, I carried myself with elegance and composure that suggested confidence and self-respect. I practiced subtle gestures, refined posture, and a calm, steady presence that could communicate dignity without the need for words. Each interaction with guests, however brief, became an opportunity to exercise this quiet mastery of self-presentation, building a repertoire of subtle cues that could signal value to those observant enough to notice. Beyond appearance, I focused on cultivating inner qualities, patience, resilience, and the ability to remain composed even under stress or criticism. I realized that true impact did not come from loud declarations or overt displays, but from a carefully maintained balance of presence, confidence, and timing. In the midst of serving, arranging, and attending to the myriad details demanded of me, I began to imagine the moment when someone discerning might finally take notice, recognizing qualities that had long been ignored or dismissed by my parents. I rehearsed silently, visualizing how a single glance, an unassuming interaction, or a poised gesture could create a lasting impression, especially on someone whose attention carried weight. This preparation transformed the wedding from a scene of humiliation into a carefully navigated stage where my hidden cultivation of self could intersect with perception. Every task I completed, every demand I met, and every insult endured without complaint became part of a larger strategy, reinforcing composure, endurance, and readiness. I understood that the true measure of success was not merely surviving the event, but positioning myself in a way that allowed recognition to emerge naturally, effortlessly, and irreversibly. By cultivating presence, grace, and quiet confidence amid the expectations and oversight of my parents, I was preparing for a pivotal moment when all the careful, patient preparation of years could culminate in undeniable recognition, a moment that would contrast sharply with the assumptions of those who had long underestimated me, and transform the wedding from a scene of servitude into a stage for validation and acknowledgement that I had meticulously prepared to claim. As the wedding progressed, the moment arrived when the careful cultivation of my presence intersected with the attention of the bride's father, creating a turning point that I had been quietly preparing for over years of invisibility and servitude. While I had spent countless hours performing menial tasks and remaining unnoticed, I had also devoted just as much energy to refining my appearance, composure, and confidence in private. Understanding that recognition often comes not to those who shout the loudest, but to those who project quiet, undeniable presence at the precise moment. As he looked around the room, his eyes, discerning and attentive, scanned the crowd with a sense of awareness that few others possessed. Unlike my parents, whose focus had always been skewed by bias, assumptions, and favoritism, he had the ability to see qualities that were not immediately obvious, to notice subtle elegance, composure, and self-assurance that could easily go overlooked. In that instant, I felt the culmination of all the patience, endurance, and hidden cultivation of self-worth merge with the recognition of someone whose perception carried weight. Every gesture, every careful movement, and every subtle display of poise became amplified under his gaze. And the contrast between his awareness and my parents' neglect created a striking tension. I understood intuitively that this attention could shift perceptions irreversibly, transforming the assumptions long held about me and revealing a version of myself that had been deliberately hidden from view. This moment was not the result of confrontation or defiance, but of strategy, preparation, and timing, a testament to the years I had spent quietly building strength, skill, and presence. I sensed the surprise in his expression, the silent acknowledgement that he recognized something exceptional, something that my parents had never allowed themselves to see. This awareness brought with it a profound sense of validation and empowerment, a realization that my value was not dependent on the recognition of those who had mistreated me, but could be acknowledged by those capable of seeing beyond appearances and assumptions. The experience reinforced a lesson I had been learning for years, that visibility alone is not enough, that true recognition requires discernment, timing, and the cultivation of qualities that command attention when they are revealed. In that fleeting intersection of preparation and perception, I began to grasp the immense power of patience, strategy, and self-cultivation, and how a single glance from the right person could transform years of neglect and servitude into a moment of undeniable acknowledgement, shifting the balance of perception in ways that could never be undone. In that pivotal moment, the reaction of the bride's father illuminated the contrast between years of neglect and the undeniable presence I had cultivated in secret. While my parents had treated me as invisible, as someone whose worth was defined solely by servitude, he saw something entirely different, a person whose composure, grace, and quiet confidence could not be ignored. His expression conveyed surprise, admiration, and a subtle acknowledgement that transcended words, reflecting the recognition of qualities that had long been hidden from view. I became acutely aware of the power of being observed by someone whose judgment was impartial, someone whose perception was not clouded by preconceived notions or favoritism. Every year of enduring humiliation, performing countless chores, and suppressing frustration now converged in a single moment where all of my preparation, my poise, my self-discipline, my cultivated presence, was validated in a way my parents could never have anticipated. This recognition carried with it a profound sense of empowerment, a realization that my worth had always existed, even if it had been denied by those closest to me, and that it could finally be acknowledged by someone who truly saw me. The contrast between his reaction and the ignorance of my parents highlighted the subtle but undeniable triumph of patience and strategic cultivation of self. I understood that recognition is not merely about effort or obedience, it is about timing, presence, and the ability to project qualities that draw attention naturally and convincingly. In witnessing his reaction, I felt the culmination of years spent refining both my inner and outer self, the result of endurance, observation, and preparation manifesting in an instant that demanded acknowledgement. This moment also underscored the distinction between those who give attention indiscriminately and those whose perception carries significance. The bride's father's awareness revealed that when the right person observes and values qualities cultivated over time, it can create an irreversible shift in perception. His gaze, the subtle change in demeanor, and the unspoken acknowledgement all combined to validate the hidden strengths I had nurtured, confirming that patience, strategy, and the careful development of confidence and poise can transform invisibility into recognition. In that instant, the years of being underestimated, overlooked, and treated as a servant crystallized into a moment of undeniable validation, demonstrating that true recognition often arrives when preparation meets the attention of someone perceptive, and that the impact of such acknowledgement can resonate far beyond the fleeting moment, reshaping how value is perceived and understood. The stark contrast between the bride's father's recognition and my parents' ignorance was both striking and transformative, revealing the quiet power that comes from being acknowledged by someone who truly sees your worth. While my parents had spent years treating me as invisible, as someone whose value was measured only by servitude and compliance, his attention illuminated the qualities they had ignored: poise, confidence, composure, and a presence that commanded notice without demanding it. The subtle admiration in his expression, the way his gaze lingered, and the unspoken respect he projected created a profound shift, not only in the perception of those around him but also within myself. For the first time, I experienced the validation of my hidden strengths, the acknowledgement that the years of patience, discipline, and quiet cultivation had not been in vain. I realized that recognition from the right observer could be more powerful than any approval from those who had belittled me, because it was untainted by bias, favoritism, or expectation, and it reflected a genuine appreciation for qualities that had been cultivated with intention and care. My parents' discomfort and astonishment at this sudden acknowledgement only heightened the contrast, revealing the gap between their limited perception and the truth that had existed all along. Their inability to recognize my worth underscored the irony that while they had attempted to diminish me, the qualities they dismissed had been quietly accumulating, ready to emerge when the circumstances allowed. This experience also reinforced the lesson that visibility alone is insufficient. Recognition depends on the observer's ability to perceive, value, and respond to qualities that are often hidden beneath the surface. The bride's father's reaction was a demonstration of the power of discernment, showing that when someone perceptive notices competence, grace, and presence, it can create a moment that is both validating and irreversible. The impact of his acknowledgement rippled outward, influencing how others began to see me, challenging assumptions and shifting social dynamics in subtle but meaningful ways. For me, it was a turning point that transformed years of servitude, humiliation, and invisibility into evidence of resilience, strategic preparation, and personal growth. It proved that enduring neglect, cultivating hidden strengths, and remaining patient could converge into a single decisive moment where one's worth is recognized, respected, and undeniable, creating a lasting impression that reshapes both perception and self-perception in ways that cannot be undone. The realization of my own value, illuminated through the bride's father's recognition, became a transformative moment, revealing that self-worth is not dependent on the approval of those who have long overlooked or mistreated you. For years, my parents had imposed a narrative in which I existed solely to serve, diminishing every effort I made and dismissing every achievement or quality that did not conform to their narrow expectations. Their inability or unwillingness to acknowledge my talents, composure, and presence had instilled a sense of invisibility that I had learned to endure, yet it also fueled a quiet determination to cultivate strengths that could not be ignored. When the bride's father's gaze met mine, and a subtle acknowledgement passed between us, it became clear that recognition could come from those whose judgment was unclouded by personal bias, assumptions, or long-held favoritism. In that moment, I understood that my worth had always existed independently of my parents' perception, and that validation could be realized without confrontation, entitlement, or demand. This realization was both empowering and revelatory, the qualities that had been ignored for so long. Patience, resilience, composure, grace, and self-assured presence were now visible to someone whose attention carried significance. The contrast between the recognition I received and the continued astonishment of my parents underscored the profound irony that their efforts to control, diminish, and confine me had only sharpened the qualities that eventually commanded respect. Every year of enduring humiliation, completing tasks without acknowledgement, and suppressing frustration had been a form of preparation, a careful cultivation of self, that allowed me to step into the light when the moment presented itself. This experience reinforced the lesson that true value is often revealed not to those who impose expectations or limitations, but to those capable of seeing beyond surface roles and assumptions. It also highlighted the importance of patience, strategy, and the deliberate development of presence, composure, and confidence, which together create an undeniable force of recognition when aligned with the perception of someone perceptive. In that moment, I felt a profound internal affirmation. The acknowledgement of worth and dignity can emerge even in environments where it has long been denied, and the validation of hidden strength carries a quiet, yet unmistakable triumph. Years of neglect and mistreatment were transformed into evidence of resilience, preparation, and innate value, proving that recognition can arrive unexpectedly, altering perception and demonstrating that the person who had been underestimated for so long was, in reality, more than capable of commanding attention, respect, and admiration. By the time the pivotal moment of recognition arrived, I had come to understand that the journey from invisibility to acknowledgement required more than patience. It demanded strategic awareness, the careful cultivation of inner strength, and the deliberate refinement of outward presence. Years of being treated as a servant had taught me lessons in endurance, resilience, and subtle observation, revealing how perceptions are formed and how they can shift when confronted with qualities that are undeniable. I had learned to navigate humiliation without letting it erode my sense of self, to complete tasks flawlessly while remaining invisible, and to cultivate skills, composure, and confidence in private, knowing that these hidden investments could one day transform into visible power. The recognition from the bride's father crystallized the value of this preparation. Unlike my parents, whose attention had been clouded by assumptions, favoritism, and a narrow definition of worth, he saw beyond appearances and immediate roles, perceiving the hidden depth of patience, poise, and capability that I had nurtured over years. His acknowledgement was subtle, yet powerful, signaling that the qualities I had long honed in secret could not be ignored. In witnessing this, I recognized a profound truth. Validation is not necessarily given by those closest to us, but often arrives from the perception of those who approach the world with discernment and impartiality. This realization reinforced the importance of timing, strategy, and the cultivation of both inner and outer self. Every subtle gesture, every composed movement, every carefully maintained posture and expression that I had practiced became meaningful in this instant, demonstrating that presence and refinement, when aligned with perceptive observation, can command attention and respect. The contrast between the astonishment of my parents and the quiet acknowledgement of someone perceptive highlighted the power of underestimated individuals to assert value when circumstances align. I also understood that preparation does not simply involve skill or appearance, but the internal readiness to project confidence, poise, and dignity, allowing others to see what has been invisible for so long. The moment affirmed that enduring neglect, mistreatment, and invisibility is not wasted if it is coupled with patient cultivation of strengths, observation of dynamics, and strategic positioning. Years of subservience and marginalization were transformed into evidence of capability and value, creating a lasting impression that could shift perceptions irreversibly. Recognition, when it arrives in this way, carries with it the weight of triumph, demonstrating that patience, preparation, and the cultivation of presence can convert invisibility into undeniable acknowledgement and respect. By this point, I had come to fully grasp the significance of subtle influence and the power of being observed by the right person at the right moment. Years of being relegated to the background, performing countless tasks without acknowledgement, and enduring constant dismissal had instilled in me a quiet resilience and an acute awareness of social dynamics. I realized that recognition often arrives not from those who impose expectations or who are clouded by bias, but from those whose perception is discerning and impartial. The bride's father represented this type of observer, someone capable of noticing qualities that had been cultivated quietly and deliberately, someone whose acknowledgement could carry weight far beyond the superficial attention of others. As I moved through my assigned duties, I became increasingly aware of how the accumulation of patience, composure, and subtle refinement of presence could manifest in ways that were impossible to overlook. Every chore completed perfectly, every insult endured silently, and every moment of invisibility contributed to a reservoir of strength and readiness, allowing me to present myself in a manner that demanded attention without demanding it. I had learned that influence is rarely about loud declarations or overt confrontation. It is about timing, precision, and the strategic projection of qualities that command respect and recognition. In observing the reactions of others, I noticed that even a fleeting gesture, a poised glance, or a calm, confident posture could leave a lasting impression, especially when contrasted with long-held assumptions of inferiority or invisibility. The recognition I received from the bride's father validated the countless hours spent cultivating both inner and outer strength, demonstrating that enduring neglect and subservience does not diminish potential, but can serve as preparation for moments where acknowledgement becomes inevitable. I also realized that being underestimated was, paradoxically, an advantage, granting me the freedom to grow and refine myself without scrutiny. This insight transformed my perception of the challenges I had endured, reframing them as opportunities to develop patience, resilience, and strategic awareness. In that instant, the convergence of preparation and perception created a powerful affirmation. The qualities I had nurtured in private could not be ignored once observed by someone capable of discernment. The moment revealed the profound impact of enduring hardship with intention, of cultivating presence and poise in silence, and of understanding that true recognition often comes not from the expected sources, but from those whose attention carries significance, capable of transforming years of neglect into undeniable acknowledgement, respect, and lasting influence. By the time the critical moment unfolded at the wedding, I had fully internalized the significance of preparation, patience, and self-cultivation in shaping perception. Years of being treated as invisible, relegated to menial tasks, and subjected to constant dismissal had provided a crucible in which resilience, composure, and quiet strength were forged. I had come to understand that the attention and recognition I had been denied by my parents could be claimed elsewhere, from those whose perception was impartial, discerning, and capable of seeing value beyond assumptions and biases. The bride's father embodied precisely this kind of observer, someone whose acknowledgement could carry profound weight and shift perceptions decisively. As I moved through my duties, attending to countless small details, I became acutely aware that every gesture, posture, and interaction was part of a larger strategy, a subtle rehearsal of presence and composure that could transform years of invisibility into a single moment of recognition. I focused on projecting confidence without arrogance, grace without ostentation, and composure without drawing undue attention, understanding that true impact is often understated but deeply memorable. The recognition I received from him was immediate and undeniable, a subtle acknowledgement that contrasted sharply with the ignorance and assumptions of my parents. His gaze, his demeanor, and the unspoken respect communicated that the qualities I had cultivated, poise, patience, resilience, and quiet authority, were finally being seen for what they truly were. This experience reinforced the lesson that recognition is rarely about confrontation or demanding acknowledgement. It is about timing, perception, and the careful alignment of one's presence with the awareness of someone capable of discerning worth. I realized that the years of unnoticed labor, humiliation, and suppression had not been wasted. They had been a form of preparation, equipping me with the ability to step forward with impact when circumstances allowed. The moment also underscored the transformative power of being underestimated, as the very invisibility imposed upon me had provided the freedom to develop skills, cultivate poise, and refine self-awareness without interference or expectation. In this intersection of preparation and perception, I experienced the quiet triumph of years of effort, patience, and strategic self-cultivation, witnessing firsthand how enduring neglect and marginalization can ultimately create the conditions for recognition, respect, and the undeniable affirmation of one's value, leaving a lasting impression that shifts both perception and understanding. As the wedding reached its most significant moments, I began to grasp the full weight of the contrast between years of invisibility and the sudden recognition that awaited me. For so long my parents had defined me only by servitude, dismissing my efforts, belittling my presence, and refusing to acknowledge any qualities beyond obedience. Their neglect and favoritism toward my siblings created an environment in which I was conditioned to believe that recognition, respect, and validation were luxuries that I would never experience. Yet, the very hardships I endured became the foundation for a transformation that was quietly taking shape, allowing me to cultivate patience, resilience, and a deep understanding of social dynamics. Every chore performed flawlessly, every insult endured without complaint, and every moment of invisibility was not wasted. It became a building block in preparing a version of myself that could command attention when the right eyes finally noticed. The bride's father, whose judgment was unclouded by bias or assumption, represented the observer capable of perceiving what had been invisible to those closest to me. As he surveyed the room, his gaze eventually met mine, and in that instant, the subtle acknowledgement of my presence and composure conveyed far more than words ever could. It was a recognition of strength, grace, and dignity that had been cultivated in secret over years of patient endurance. I realized that recognition is rarely about demanding attention. It is about preparation, timing, and the careful projection of qualities that naturally draw acknowledgement. The moment also highlighted the irony that those who had dismissed me for so long were unable to see the very strengths that were now so evident to someone outside their assumptions. Their astonishment contrasted sharply with the validation I experienced, emphasizing that value is not dictated by those who underestimate you, but by those capable of discernment and impartial judgment. In that instant, I understood the transformative power of patience and hidden preparation. As years of neglect, servitude, and strategic self-cultivation coalesced into undeniable acknowledgement. The experience reinforced the lesson that enduring hardship with intention, observing, and refining one's presence can create opportunities for recognition that transcend prior limitations. It was a moment where invisibility was replaced by acknowledgement, servitude gave way to respect, and the careful accumulation of hidden strengths culminated in a lasting impression that reshaped perception. revealing that what had long been overlooked was, in truth, invaluable and undeniable. By the final moments of the wedding, I fully understood how years of neglect, invisibility, and subservience had prepared me for a moment of undeniable recognition. For so long, my parents had confined me to a life of endless chores, constant obedience, and the suppression of any ambition or self-expression, treating me as if my value existed only in service to others. Every effort I made, every accomplishment, and even the cultivation of my own presence had gone unnoticed or dismissed, leaving me with the sense that acknowledgement was something I could never claim within my own home. Yet, through this prolonged experience of marginalization, I had quietly developed patience, resilience, and a strategic awareness that would eventually allow me to assert my worth in a way that could not be ignored. I had spent countless hours refining my appearance, composure, and demeanor, practicing gestures, posture, and subtle expressions that conveyed confidence and poise without attracting unwanted attention. I had cultivated emotional intelligence, learning to observe social dynamics, anticipate reactions, and position myself so that when the moment arrived, my presence would resonate in a way that commanded attention naturally. The bride's father, whose judgment was perceptive and unbiased, became the observer whose acknowledgement could validate years of silent preparation. As his gaze fell upon me, the recognition was immediate and profound, signaling awareness of qualities that had been invisible to my parents for so long. His subtle expression of surprise, respect, and appreciation revealed that the patience and care invested in cultivating my hidden strengths had achieved their purpose. This moment illustrated the crucial distinction between mere visibility and meaningful recognition. It is not enough to be present. True acknowledgement comes from the eyes of someone capable of discerning value beyond expectation or assumption. I realized that the hardship endured, the invisibility imposed, and the relentless demands placed upon me had not diminished me, but had, in fact, allowed me to develop a refined presence, strategic awareness, and quiet confidence that could not be denied when finally revealed. The long years of servitude, exclusion, and humiliation were transformed into evidence of strength, preparation, and resilience, culminating in a moment where acknowledgement, respect, and validation arrived precisely because I had cultivated the qualities necessary to command them. In that instant, what had once been ignored became undeniable, proving that patience, strategy, and deliberate self-cultivation can convert invisibility into recognition and long-term marginalization into a profound, lasting affirmation of worth. In conclusion, the journey from being overlooked and undervalued to finally receiving recognition is a testament to the power of patience, resilience, and strategic self-cultivation. Years of servitude, neglect, and humiliation were not wasted. They became the foundation upon which strength, grace, and presence were quietly built. The pivotal moment of acknowledgement, when my hidden qualities were finally seen, proves that true worth cannot be diminished by those who fail to recognize it, and that the right observer, at the right time, can transform years of invisibility into undeniable respect. This story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, every act of endurance, every skill nurtured in secret, and every ounce of composure matters, shaping a version of yourself that cannot be ignored when it is finally revealed. To everyone listening, remember that your value is not defined by those who overlook you, but by the qualities you cultivate within yourself and the moments when the world is ready to see them. Keep believing in your worth, nurture your strengths quietly, and trust that recognition and respect will come to those who remain patient, resilient, and true to themselves. Good luck to all of you on your journey. May you find the courage to endure, the wisdom to prepare, and the confidence to shine when your moment arrives. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and for sharing in this story of perseverance, transformation, and the ultimate triumph of self-worth.